parable of the unjust steward, as it's often referred to, has proved to be an intractable mystery for scholar and faithful Christian alike. It's a strange story where Jesus apparently congratulates an employee, a steward, for ripping off his boss. I'm Justin Lasser. This is Unorthodox Orthodoxy, and we're going to read this particular parable from Luke chapter 16 in the context of the ancient world. And the reason I can say that our reading is informed by actual tax receipts, marriage contracts, labor agreements between tenants and landholders, absentee landholders in cities, mundane things that are part of everyday life. They're just in a trash dump. And Egypt, particularly a place called Oxyrhynchus, is dry enough to preserve this material. And so almost everything that happens in the parables that are attributed to the historical Jesus have reference to things that happen in these documents. Well, enough of that. I'm going to dive in because this is the best example I can think of to introduce us to the economy of honor and shame, patron and client in the Roman world and the Jewish world in the first century. This was the economy, an economy of prestige, an economy of shame. Basically, it would be the ancient world's version of a series of likes or dislikes, if they had that option in Instagram. It's kind of like that. I'm going to go ahead and read. This is from David Bentley Hart's translation. And he said, "There was a certain rich man who had a steward, and the complaint was made concerning him that he was wasting his property. And calling him, he said, 'What is this that I hear about you? Render the account of your stewardship, for you can be steward no longer.' And the steward said to himself, 'What may I do? For my Lord is taking the stewardship away from me. I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg.'" That's really important. "I've realized what I might do, so when I am removed from the stewardship, they might welcome me into their houses." And summoning each one of his lord's debtors, he said to the first, 'How much do you owe my lord?' He said, 100 baths of oil. He said to him, 'Well, take your bill, quickly, sit down, and make it 50. Then he said to another, 'And how much do you owe?' And he said, 100 cores of grain. He tells him, 'Take your bill and write 80. And the Lord praised the dishonest steward, because he acted prudently." This is very clearly a parable of the historical Jesus, because the next verse is something that Luke is adding as a summary statement. We'll see this throughout the parables in Matthew and Luke, and occasionally in Mark. Most of the time in the Gospel of Thomas, the parables don't have these elaborations or summary statements, another way to put it. And the Gospel of John generally doesn't have parables, except perhaps one. Here's Luke's elaboration. "For the sons of this age are more prudent in dealing with their own generation than are the sons of light. Whoever is faithful in the least thing is also faithful in much, and whoever is dishonest in the least thing is also dishonest in much." So that is going to shift the parable to be an example story, which Luke, likely writing in the 2nd century, I argue that, along with contemporary critical scholarship, that the Gospel of Luke and Acts is likely a 2nd century document, more on that in the future. But he is shifting this story into an example story of persistence and prayer, and using dishonest means to help the poor. But let's look at what this might mean in the ancient world in the 1st century, early 1st century, and this bears all the marks of a parable of the historical Jesus because it has a surprise, and most importantly, what I want to demonstrate is that it puts someone in a bind. It takes what is conventionally expected, and then it frustrates it. So let me give you a sense as to why this guy initially may not be good, but ends up not being the unjust steward, but precisely the most just steward, the most just employee. In the beginning, right, we have this rich man has a steward, and a complaint is made against him that he's wasting his owner's property. That strikes us as if the owner has to say, well, then I need to kick you out. But that's not really what's going on. In an honor-shame situation, in an honor-shame culture, where the likes you have on Instagram or the way that people would think of you is more important than money. Money is a means to gain prestige and honor, and that allows you to have access to all these different parts of society and the economy. What's happened here is there's a whisper campaign against him. So people have come up and said, hey, you are not a good manager of your own household, where we get our word economy, oikos, this house, oikos, the economy. And so now this owner, his honor is being challenged publicly. So he summons this guy and says, publicly, you're not allowed to serve anymore. So what does he do? He is too ashamed, honor and shame, to beg. It's not his social standing. He's too weak to dig, so he has not been doing manual labor for a long time. By the way, this is almost the same profile of the person who becomes the prodigal son in that famous parable, more on that in the future. So he says, I'm too ashamed to beg. I can't dig. What will I do so that peasants, that is the poor people, those who are in the kingdom of God, the poor, the hungry, those who are depressed and weeping and mourning, those who are persecuted, those people, right? He says, what will I do so that they may welcome me into their houses? Here's what I'm going to do. How much do you owe? $100? Make it 80. How much do you owe? $100? Make it 50. What he's doing in the ancient world is he's taking off the interest that he would normally siphon off the top. If you've ever seen the series Outlander, or if you've learned about feudalism, this was a common practice when people would collect rents. They would add a little extra, if you know what I mean. So he's cutting off his portion. He's getting the money, but he's still doing this out of self-interest. Self-interest so that he'll be received, and also continuing what he was doing on the side, wink, wink, wink. Well, what happens? He goes back to the master, and the master now is in a bind. He's stuck. He has two options, right? He can say, all right, too bad. Yes, you got me some of the money, but I'm kicking you out anyway. Rather, what he does is he doesn't share the fact that he got ripped off. He's saying publicly so that those people that challenged his honor, he says, no, I'm good. I congratulate you. Thank you. I can run my house correctly. We're going to see this dynamic throughout the parables, that someone's in a bind, and normally the conventional practice would be to kick him out, and then he would just be out of the stewardship. But he is an accidental client in the kingdom of God. And he becomes that. He becomes subject to the kingdom of God because he cuts people a break, and he acts subversively within the system. This is the kind of stuff that might actually get you in trouble, and we should never forget that Jesus is executed as a criminal against the state, or a rival king against the state. Honor and shame, patron and client, Jesus weaves an incredibly poetic story that should provoke laughter and also ask us, where do we stand in this world today, in the way that it's applied? We live in a world where people don't receive a living wage, and many of those bosses happen to be, at least they claim, Christian. But you can't not pay someone a living wage and be subject as a patron in God's kingdom. And so the person that is congratulated here is precisely the person that our culture would put down. Hope this is interesting. Look forward to the next one. Parable of the Feast is up next. Have a great night.